Everyone, thank you so much for joining me. And of course, thank you for inviting me to travel here for this event. I am coming in from the United States, where I've lived for about 35 years. I was an international student in the US, so I've lived there for quite a while. The first time I came to Mexico was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, doing consulting work in what was then, I guess, LAFA. And within a week of coming to Mexico, I felt like I had returned home. See, I'd grown up in India, and there is remarkable similarity. The warmth of the people, the heat of the food, it's very similar in the post-colonial history. I'm really intrigued by this. And as I read more about it, I of course discovered Octavio Paz, which of course you know, world-renowned Nobel Prize-winning poet. But perhaps you did not know that he was an ambassador to India. And he spent quite a bit of time in India. And he wrote some wonderful works, including this one called In Light of India. So if any of this is interesting to you, I would definitely recommend a read. At this point, you're probably wondering if you're at the right conference. Because literature was never part of the title. I bring it up because literature is the epitome of creativity. And creativity is the currency of the CMO. We long thought that technology was good for making machines, for writing code. But somehow creativity was sacrosanct. It was sacred. You couldn't touch it. But AI is changing a lot of that. So let me give you another example. This is Margaret Atwood, if you're familiar with her. If you're not, you may be more familiar with the Hulu series, The Handmaid's Tale. She's Canadian, and she writes dark and dystopic stories, futuristic stories. So, someone did some research and asked one of the Gen AI engines to write a dark and dystopic story in the style, in the voice of Margaret Atwood that takes place in Canada. And here's what it did. This is just the beginning. It's not bad. Every morning as the rose-tinted dawn slices the stillness of night, which sounds really poetic, right? So this is this whole story. And then as part of the research, who did they have critique this story? Margaret Atwood, right? So now she's critiquing this work that's written in the style of Margaret Atwood. Here's what she says. She says, Gen AI chatbots don't seem to be able to reflect on what they're saying. Though that in itself wouldn't differentiate them from us. They are bad at verbal texture. They have a poor grasp of metaphor and even pronunciation. They're learning from us. So why wouldn't that be true? Now, that said, that story was not bad. For a machine to generate that, and this is just the beginning stages, makes one wonder what it could write in about 10 years' time. Okay, so let's leave literature behind because that was not part of the conference agenda. And let's talk more fundamentally about technology, right? Let's talk basics. Let's talk about how humans interact with technology. Every January in Las Vegas, they have an event called CES. Used to be called Consumer Electronics Show, now they've abbreviated it. In decades past, it used to be full of technology people. Now it's actually full of marketers. Are there folks here that have attended CES in Las Vegas? Yeah, so I see a few hands go up. If you were there this year, the hot new thing was this thing called the Rabbit. It's a cute little device. It's got a 360-degree camera. It can see you, it can hear you, it can speak with you. And the whole idea of it is this would be your personal assistant. It would be your interface across your device ecosystems to all the services that you use. It's similar in spirit to what Siri is trying to do, or Google Assistant is trying to do, but the way they differentiate themselves is they call it a large action model, meaning it will take action on your behalf. Schedule your haircut, get you a car, buy you a ticket, order you food, etc., etc. Anyway, this was a big deal. Everyone loved it. This is one of the milder pieces written about it. It's an AI-powered gadget that can use your apps for you. Lot of brouhaha about the rabbit. And then the rabbit starts to shit. And it's just a disaster, right? It doesn't do anything. It doesn't do it well. Tech Radar calls it a beautiful mess that I'm not sure anyone needs. This, though, is history about to repeat itself. Because in 1993, there was a device called the Newton. Anyone owned a Newton? Yeah, I had a boss who used to use it. This thing was another beautiful mess. It was clunky, it was a disaster. But without the Newton, we would have never had these. So there's something here called Amara's law, which is we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short term and underestimate the effect in the long term. So we get super excited about stuff, right? And then it doesn't come through and we're like, pfft. You have to get things done. Okay, here's a good example. Augmented reality first started kind of coming into play in 1968. It took almost 50 years before anyone really took notice of augmented reality. And there was one thing that put augmented reality in the front of everyone's mind. Does anyone know what it is? Kids' game. It's Pokemon Go. Suddenly people started to take notice. The business transformation of augmented reality, you have Pokemon Go to thank for it, right? So here's an instance where it did not go so well. The metaverse, right? Remember how excited we got about it? But it kind of turned out to be the metaverse. And I think we got excited in the wrong way, right? So now we had a new Coke. It was called Bite. And what was the flavor? Pixel flavor. And somehow as a consumer you would derive joy by consuming pixel flavored Bite Cola on the metaverse. So the problem with that is that when these things become gimmickry, then marketing risks drifting further away from the nucleus of the business. Now I don't think that's going to happen with AI, right? For a bunch of reasons. But let's go back to this idea of Amara's law, right? Here's a rabbit that everyone loves to hate. But the reality is that ChatGPT can hear you, can speak with you. And OpenAI is now talking with Jony Ives, the legendary designer of all the Apple products that you love, to come up with a new gadget. And I would put my money on this, and you can write it down. 5 years from now, 50% of the way we interact with technology will not be through text input. There's just going to be some other way of doing it. It's already started. This is a simple little thing. And tomorrow, Apple's going to release its new iPhone, and the AirPods are going to get updates. So in a crowded room like this, you get a call and you have your AirPods. How do you answer your call? How do you decline your call? You're not swiping anything on your phone, right? There are different modes now of interacting with machines. So, maybe the metaverse wasn't a bad idea in concept. Which is why Apple has an Apple Vision Pro that no one really buys because it's $3,500. People complain about it all the time, etc., etc. But it's a great product for Apple because they're learning how people interact with their environment. Okay, so that's tech. Let's talk a little bit about the consumer. Okay? And I want to start with first principles here. So let's learn about technology from the most valuable technology company in the world. Scratch that, the most valuable company in the world, period. And what you might learn will surprise you. I'll let you read that. But if you're ever thinking about doing an executive education program at Harvard and so on, scrap that. I have a cheaper solution for you. Go to YouTube and look for Steve Jobs' speech that he gives when he releases the iPad. That is just a must listen for anyone. And this is straight from there. He says, look, when you're thinking about this stuff, you have to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. Don't start with the technology and find unsuspecting people to sell it. Right? So that is very much part of how Forrester thinks about all of this. Right? Now, I've done a lot of research around how do you optimize digital touch points for customer experiences and brand experiences, right? There are a couple of slides here, small font, you don't need to read all of it. And by the way, if you're interested in these topics, I mean, we have a lot of reports on it. So feel free to come ask me. My colleague Arturo was also here, Arturo is back there. So you can grab him, he will be here for the entirety of this event. And whatever you found interesting, we'll get you help and get you some information. Anyway, here's the idea. The idea is very basic. And if you've ever heard of Christian Christensen and jobs to be done, that's basically what it is. People don't want to buy stuff, they need to get things accomplished. There are 4 basic things that consumers want to do, right? And it's right up top there. They want to complete tasks, which in French means get shit done. They want to be entertained, they want to educate themselves, and they want to achieve some future goals. Their entire life is structured around that. So, depending on what they need is in a particular moment, you have to figure out the right kind of touch point. Sometimes, indeed, tapping on a keyboard works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's voice. There are good applications for a metaverse-like situation. Augmented reality will work. So there are examples in financial services, etc., etc. The whole idea is, first you figure out what your customer is trying to do, and then offer up the most relevant touch point for that. And sometimes the result will surprise you. So this is Zappos, if you're familiar with them, phenomenal e-commerce business, part of Amazon. And the CEO says, sometimes the telephone is the best thing, right? Because it gives you an opportunity to build a relationship with the customer. That's not always true. We have a lot of discussions and research on human and tech and how do you balance it. And sometimes tech can be very human, it can be humane. I mean, who wants to stand in a long line and check in for a flight, right? It's much easier to do it on your phone. But sometimes the human element works, right? So you've got to balance the human and tech piece. But make sure you align the touch point to the need of the customer. All right? Now let's look at how consumers are using AI, Gen AI, etc. Right? So it's US data. It's roughly for a year, right? Don't look through all of it. Just look at the first data point. Look at the last data point. The one right. So essentially, what you're saying is 17% of people a year back had never heard of it. That goes down to 5%, right? The line in the middle that goes up, 22% of people had used Gen AI, that's up to 42%, right? So the whole idea is, again, no surprise, you know this, right? That over the course of a year, there has been a rapid escalation of awareness and usage of Gen AI. Okay? This is US data. This is some data from Ipsos. And it's similar data. Now, I'll show you different pieces of data from different sources. So sometimes the numbers will not match exactly. but people saying, I have a good understanding of what AI is. The global average is 67, the US is around there, Brazil is a little bit less. Mexico, however, is 80%. You know Mexico much better than I do, so maybe I'll come find you later and ask you why. But it's very interesting, in all of these similar data points, the Mexican numbers are much higher, right? And again, I have some hypotheses. I have seen, for example, in the payments world, how Asian markets completely leapfrogged a lot of Western markets, right? So there's something going on here, but it makes the Mexican scenario for AI and Gen AI just a little bit different. Because in the bigger markets, if you will, there is more caution, there is more hesitancy around Gen AI than there is in Mexico. Here's something else, okay? And this was surprising to me. And please forgive my awful Spanish, but es una herramienta útil, which I think means is an effective tool, right? Here's what's super interesting. If you look across generations, yes, of course, from Gen Z to millennials, there's a 10% drop, but then it remains pretty consistent all the way to baby boomers. And I did not expect that. I'd expected it to drop off much more. So there's more excitement, more confidence, it's more dispersed across the population, which is great. I do a lot of work with financial services companies. I just did some work in the US, and they always tell me, oh, our older customers who are our core customer base, they are very different from our younger customers who are all on TikTok and all of that, and that's how they learn about finance. The difference is not that much here in sort of the people's belief in the utility of Gen AI. Again, similar data. Products and services using AI will profoundly change my daily life in the next 3 to 5 years. Notice how the Mexican numbers are quite a bit higher, right? So then what are people doing with Gen AI? And I only have US data for this, and if you can't read it from the back, let me read it out to you. Biggest one, 64%, is to find an answer. This is what I do all the time on ChatGPT, right? Like, I have a presentation and something at the end, and what should I talk about? To draft or create something. In fact, that slide with the Margaret Atwood story written by Gen AI, that background was generated by AI. To give me advice or recommendation, to summarize something, to help you plan for a trip. Bless you. If you go to Expedia, you have all kinds of these Gen AI tools there. I want to take a trip to France and I want to go wine tasting, but I'm not very familiar with the area and my budget is not too high. Where do you think I should go? Right? That kind of stuff. So brands are weaving that in. So these are the examples that you're seeing of consumer usage of Gen AI. Where this is going to go, we believe, is this idea of a digital double or a digital twin. So you as an individual will supply all your information, all your preferences, all your likes and dislikes to this amorphous digital twin. And who knows, maybe it'll live in a rabbit that we looked at, right? That twin then goes out and interacts with the world, with search engines, with other algorithms, etc., etc. That's a much more sophisticated implementation than asking ChatGPT questions. And it's going to require a lot more for you to give up all of this information about yourself, preferences, and so on. But that's sort of where we are headed with this. All right, let's talk about the market. So marketers love this, right? CMOs are very bullish on AI. This is data, I believe, from BCG. And they find that the vast majority of marketers across regions and industries are optimistic, they're confident, they're curious, and they think they can do a whole lot with it. I've been doing a whole bunch of research on how marketing organizations can be most effective. And I've talked to a lot of CMOs about the role that they play in their organizations when it comes to AI and Gen AI. And across the board, I have seen CMOs really step up and play a leadership role. I cherry-picked one quote from my report, and this is, Amica is an insurance company in the US. And the CMO told me, look, it is our job to be a leader and a trailblazer in this area. I heard the same thing from the CMO of Pfizer. I heard the same thing from the CMO of Scotiabank. And I think what is happening is there's AI stuff that's happening in technology, but nowhere else is anyone stepping up. So in marketing in the last decade has been so infused with data and analytics that it is a natural progression for the ambitious CMO to say, hey, I'm going to pick that up. And you can see that in the data. So this says, hey, which of this best describes what you're doing with Gen AI in marketing? And the bars that you see are end of last year. Again, if you can't read it in the back, tiny little one, no intention of doing anything. Next one, we are intrigued. 40%, we are exploring use cases, but then 26% we are already doing stuff with it. You just rewind not even an entire year, and you see what happens to the bars, right? I mean, it's basically like a wave that is moving to the right. So you're drawing from the people who are intrigued and experimenting. You have many more people, many more CMOs using Gen AI. What are they doing it for? Okay? You can look through the list. What struck me is they're doing it for everything. There isn't a big, like, here's my 70%, here's my 11%, right? Optimizing media channel selection, targeted personalized ads, they're right on top. So this is what CMOs are doing with the technology in their business. Here are a few examples. This is Rappi, I believe, in Mexico. I know Prestado because they've done work with JP Morgan Chase. And what they basically do is using AI, they optimize text, they optimize images, they optimize the emotional content of messaging to maximize whatever the outcome is that they desire. Sign-ups for cards, click-through rates, etc., etc. And here's an example of, hey, this is what my marketing team did. And by the way, that's how it works. We talked about human and AI and human and tech, right? It's not like AI, go give me an ad, right? Oftentimes it comes from the marketing team, it goes through an AI iteration, it goes back to the marketing team, then it's ready for prime time, right? But this is an example of what AI is adding to it. There are some sort of obvious ones, and you've seen things like this before. Here are 5 things on my kitchen table, I've taken a picture of it, give me a recipe, right? So there are applications like that. And then there are applications that simply my head would burst if I had to figure it out, right? This is Viva Aerobus, and they're saying that, look, we used to reprice 3-4 times a day. Now, anyone goes into our system at any time and asks for a fare, they reprice the entire system of fares, right? I mean, airline pricing is bad enough and complicated enough to begin with. It's incredible to what degree they can fine-tune and optimize because of that. All right, there's lots of stuff going on. In the course of my research, I interviewed a lot of people. So I spoke with the partner at Dipanjan, which is a big brand strategy firm, and he was telling me about the work he does with his clients. I said, if you're getting a little nervous about it, you're still learning this stuff, what should you do as a marketer, right? So he said there are 3 practical and low-risk applications. One we just talked about, right? Personalize the context with text and images to get better outcomes, number 1. Number 2, he said, look, in a lot of businesses, B2B, also B2B, B2C, in the handoff of leads from marketing to sales, there's a big drop-off because a lot of information is lost. And the sales team does not know how to make the most effective first outreach to the customers. There's a big role that marketing can play with Gen AI to help sales make that first outreach, right? Number 2. Number 3, this is super interesting for someone interested in consumer research and so on. interactive segment personas, right? So you've created a synthetic persona, and now anytime you have any questions about anything, you ask this persona, and it just replies to you. No need to do focus groups, no need to pay for expensive research, right? So here's an example of some work that Dipanjan did. He says, hey Lauren, like, tell me what your bathroom, what's going on there? And Lauren goes into great detail, including, I have the Labo on my shelves and all of that. And then here's a picture. This is AI-generated visualization of what that bathroom might be like. So let's say you're a brand manager for a certain cosmetic. You're just, hitting that AI persona constantly because you think, should I roll out this product? Well, how would this promotion work? Should I expand my display in the store? You have something to ask, right? So that's a great application. Now, there is an elephant in the room. And if you notice, when I give you Lippincot's 3 top ones, low risk, we didn't talk about that, right? There's a problem, there's a risk, there's an issue with AI. Let me give you an example with stock imagery for campaigns, which is right out there, 60%, third most used application, right? We already know that consumers are nervous about AI. Okay? 52% think poses a serious risk to society, it's going to take over the world. 45% say AI is biased. The question is it biased? So you saw folks like Forrester and so on use image generation quite a bit. Here's an image generation tool. Give me an image of an Indian person because I want to send out a credit card, sign up for a new credit card email. So like an Indian person. So that's what you get. Right? Perhaps it looks like me, I need to grow my beard a little bit more, but I'm missing the turban. If I'm missing the turban, do you know what you're missing? You're missing the sombrero. That's what they think a Mexican person looks like. I talk about bias for the women in the room. Do you notice some other bias? Here, where are the women, right? It's interesting, so when you do this for the US, every picture behind it has a US flag. What an interesting statement on the American side. It's a little risky dissecting that any more than that, but it's intriguing. It doesn't happen for any nationality. All the US is a big flag back there. You know how many people outside my lane hang flags of their houses? It makes sense to me. All right, last thing we'll talk about is alignment. And alignment is not specific just to AI, right? Any kind of digital experience, everyone in the company's got to get their act together, right? And the way I think about it best is, so 1953, the Everest was first scaled, right? 2 men, Edmund Hillary, who was a beekeeper in New Zealand, and Tenzing Norgay was a Sherpa from Darjeeling. If you have tea, and you like Darjeeling tea, that's where he's from, right? So they scaled the Everest, right? But just rewind 1 minute from where they scaled the Everest. These 2 men are literally standing 5 steps away, right? And they make 2 very important decisions. The first decision is who is actually going to go to the top of the Everest first. The second decision they make is, irrespective, they're never ever going to tell who got to the top first, right? Because as Hillary says, it really doesn't matter who sets foot first. Sometimes the one who does more work will let the other one go. And this whole idea of mountaineering, because you see 2 people in the summit, but actually this is their expedition, and this doesn't even include all the porters. There are 400 people, like carrying the heavy stuff up, and you never get to see them. So when you think of alignment, mountaineering is a great way of thinking of it, because if you look at the Latin root of the word align, it literally means make a line, okay? So you make a line. Here's the definition. It's a big business definition, don't worry about it. 2 parts to it. You know where you're going, and everyone's going in the same direction, right? So here's the 3 pieces in my world that get aligned the most. There's marketing, because you understand the customer. You craft the brand promise. There's CX that takes the promise and delivers into experience, into reality. And then digital business makes sure that you're covered at all the right moments with the right digital experiences. When you do all of that, it all comes together and you have aligned experiences. So to me, this is like Steve Jobs' way of thinking. This is what I need to start with, and then I need to work my way backwards to my marketing, to my CX, to my digital experience. Okay? Great. All in theory sounds fine. Why should we do this? So what we did was we did significant econometric analysis. We looked at a huge pool of companies. We assessed how aligned they were, and we assessed their financial performance, right? So number one, if you're aligned, you do well. You grow revenue 59% faster, but more importantly, you actually earn 56% higher profit. Because just a side note, there are plenty of companies who grow revenue and kill value, right? So growing revenue in and of itself is not a great idea. You have to earn a higher profit. So we have established the silver idea. How do you get to the top of the mountain, right? So what we did in this analysis is a huge piece of complex analytics here. We have all of these companies. We know who the leaders are. We know who the laggards are. So then we ask a very simple question. What is it that the leaders are doing that the laggards are not doing? Right? And then we let the data speak. So three things come up, right? Number one, cohesion. All the leaders have these three things done right. There's one brand vision. There are cohesive journeys built around the brand vision, and the measurement is all aligned. Okay? I'll give you a few quick examples of all of these. Here's what the data is saying, by the way. 78% of leaders have a holistic, connected consumer experience. Only 21% of laggards. Great example of this is the Mandarin Oriental. If you've walked into one of these hotels, my God, I mean, this is a great hotel. That is an exceptional hotel, right? It's just bathed in opulence. The amount of luxury is insane. The problem was though, when you go to the website, it was nothing like that, right? So it was a very dissonant experience. It wasn't cohesive at all. So the team at Mandarin Oriental has spent a lot of time figuring out how do you take a digital asset and make it luxurious, right? And some of the things they've done, other than just the redesign, is they've brought things like spa experiences and fine dining to the forefront where you can book it and so on, right? So there's a lot of work being done to make sure that the digital experience at least tries to emulate the amazing in-hotel physical experience. Let's talk about metrics for a little bit, right? Because alignment and metrics is super important for marketing. Because unfortunately, there's a tendency for marketers, I know none of us do it, but we get wrapped up in our own marketing metrics, which make no sense to the CFO and the CEO, right? This is what one of my clients told me. He said, look, if you love your advertising, show your mother, right? Don't show the board of directors. You can think about what that right one metric might be. We've usually found that something like customer lifetime value is a great way to do it. And where companies have had success, CMOs work very closely with CFOs to do it. In MasterCard, for example, the CMO has a finance person reporting to him in his organization, right? And there are some companies you may have heard of that use customer lifetime value. So it's a pretty potent metric. All right, we did cohesion. Let's talk about collaboration before I quickly run out of time here. This is the perfect world, but there is no perfect world, right? We have talked about breaking down silos and then holding hands and working together. That just does not happen. And particularly if any of you represent Mexican operations of global businesses, you would only know that too well. Having done work with Lexus in the US, trying to work with the Japanese office, having done work with Banco Santander in Mexico, having to work with the Spanish office, they are literally on different continents, right? So the way we found in my research, the best companies do what we call unbox. And the idea of unbox is your organizational chart are all in little boxes, just blow the thing up, right? I'm exaggerating. You unbox. And what you find is that 71% of high-growth companies use this kind of agile and flexible structure, right? I'll give you a very quick example. ShopRite is a grocery store, and what they wanted to do was create this offering for younger consumers who would get on their phone and they would menu plan and they would choose ingredients. Then they would go into the ShopRite and there was a dedicated area where they could pick up the ingredients and so on and so forth, right? So ShopRite had to do all of this. The problem was the people who designed the app and all of that, they never even went to a grocery store. And the people who were setting up the grocery store had absolutely no idea how the app worked, right? So they tried this for a while and they realized that they needed to restart the project from day one with both of these groups as co-owners, right? They sit in different boxes in different parts of the organization, just unbox it, bring it together. All right, last one, but perhaps the most important one, culture. Again, if you look at our data, 76% of leaders say we have the culture we need, 30% of laggards say we do, big gap, right? Culture, we could spend all day talking about it. The two things that are kind of interesting that I want to point out. The first is the idea of rituals. So, if you want to unbox, you can introduce rituals in a company. I'll give you two examples from Amazon. Some of them you may have heard of. First one is the empty chair. So, in every meeting that you will have an empty chair. That empty chair represents the customer who's not there. And every time you make a decision, why yourself to look at that empty chair and say, what do you think? Do you like this? You know, will you go for this? Does it add value to you? It's just kind of silly and goofy, but if you force yourself to do that, it will remind you that at the end of the day, you're serving your customer. It's a ritual that you practice. Here's another one. The two pizza team. Never have a team that's so big that you cannot feed with two pizzas. You need more than two pizzas to feed them, right? Because then you have groupthink, then you have inertia, right? You need to keep the group compact. There are a few other things you need to do as well in terms of authority, etc. But this is a ritual. There are other very interesting things in Amazon. They don't use PowerPoint, for example. And they write documents, and oftentimes if it's a 1 hour meeting, you spend the first 30 minutes just silent reading the document, right? So, these may not work for you, but surely there are some things that are more ritual-like that will work better for you, right? Sometimes these things happen much better outside of process flows and all of those very confusing things that come in with these agile processes and so on, right? Ritual is very important. And then the last thing is that culture is seated right at the top, okay? So Microsoft, and I used to do a lot of work for them when Steve Ballmer used to run them, was kind of a nasty place to be, right? So he ran it like GE used to be run. It's meritocratic, but it's up or out, and it's fiercely competitive. So when Satya Nadella took over, he literally, as he writes, his book is called Hit Refresh. And he completely changed the culture of Microsoft. And he said, look, the empathy, that grounds me and centers me, and that's going to define Microsoft. Just to give you a sense, when Satya took over, the stock price was about $30, $40. 10 years from then, it's 400. Okay? 40 to 400. A lot of that comes from the culture. All right, let me wind up here. Three things we talked about for alignment: cohesion, collaboration, and culture. But you know what's not there? It's a technology. Because here's the thing, sometimes the technology doesn't get in the way, we get in the way. The organization gets in the way. So I think this last link of the chain is vitally important. Because we can have the greatest technology and we can figure out the best way to implement it. But if we don't get out of our own way, we will never be successful. So I'll leave you with this quote from Edmund Hillary, who climbed the Everest, who says, it's not the mountain that we conquer, but it's really ourselves. I hope this was interesting, engaging, stimulating for you. I am going to be here for most part of the day, even tomorrow. Arturo is here, of course. Feel free to, find me, ask me any questions. Tell me why the numbers in Mexico for AI confidence is so much higher than the other things, and I would love to chat. Perfect. Thank you so much.